The war drums of Westeros had not yet fallen silent when Robb Stark first heard the name Daenerys Targaryen spoken not as a threat, but as a possibility. Whispers carried through the northern camps, quiet as snowfall, yet sharp enough to cut through the noise of war. The Dragon Queen lived, and she was gathering strength far across the narrow sea. Robb had no time then to care about tales from distant shores. He was fighting for the North, fighting for justice, fighting to hold together a kingdom breaking under the weight of betrayal. But fate has a way of returning to a man what he once ignored, placing it before him so boldly that he can no longer turn away. It began with a raven message delivered long after midnight, when icy winds clawed across the Stark encampment. The letter came sealed with wax he had never seen before, a deep red stamped with 3 dragons. His council exchanged uneasy looks as Robb cracked it open, expecting a threat. Instead, he found an offer, one so unexpected it forced him awake more than any winter breeze. Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, rightful queen of the 7 kingdoms, had heard of his victories. She knew the North named him king, and she proposed something neither side of the world could have imagined, a marriage alliance. Dragons and direwolves united under one cause, fire and ice bound by choice, not conquest. Robb could almost hear Catelyn's voice whispering warnings in his ear, urging caution, reminding him how alliances built on desperation tended to shatter. Yet the words on the parchment felt strangely sincere, not the desperate plea of a claimant losing hope, but the steady confidence of someone who believed her destiny stretched far beyond thrones or battles. Still, doubts lingered like shadows. Was she another conqueror wrapped in silver hair? Another monarch who believed the North must kneel? Another threat to Stark freedom? Robb wrestled with questions that had no answers, but the longer he stared at the letter, the more a dangerous thought crept into his mind. Perhaps this was the only path left to save his people. His advisors disagreed loudly. Some called her a foreign tyrant. Others feared dragons more than Lannister gold. Even the Great John roared that no wolf should ever lie beside a dragon. But Robb knew something they refused to see. His war was bleeding the North dry. Every victory cost too many lives, and every step south brought new betrayals. What good was honor if the people he swore to protect starved while he chased vengeance? He spent the night pacing alone, the cold biting at his skin as if urging him toward a decision. He imagined the Girl Queen far away, shaped by exile, loss, fire. Someone who had survived everything meant to break her. Someone who knew what it meant to be alone, yet still stood unbowed. Maybe she understood power as he did, not as a right, but a burden. By sunrise, the choice settled upon him like falling snow, silent but absolute. He would meet her. The journey across the narrow sea was filled with tension no sword could cut through. Even Greywind sensed the unease, pacing restlessly on the ship's deck. Robb's men kept hands close to blades, terrified of dragons they had never seen, while sailors whispered prayers to gods that did not listen. Robb himself felt torn between hope and dread. This meeting could unite kingdoms or destroy him before he ever set foot on land again. When the coast of Essos finally appeared, shimmering under a harsh sun so unlike the Norse, he wondered if the gods were mocking him. Heat pressed against him, overwhelming, unfamiliar. Everything here felt like another world, one where Stark honor might mean nothing at all. He saw her before she saw him, standing on a rise of stone, silver hair dancing in the wind, guarded by men who looked at Robb as if death walked beside him. And then, with a shadow that swallowed the sky, a dragon swooped low over the beach, sending his soldiers scrambling in terror. Robb did not flinch, though his heart thundered in his chest. Pride would not let him bow to fear. Not now, not before her. Daenerys stepped forward slowly, her eyes cool, curious, sharper than any blade. She looked at him not as a king, not as a threat, but as an equal. For a moment, the world shrank to the space between them, a wolf from the frozen north and a dragon forged in fire, measuring each other in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, yet carried more power than any battle cry. "So, the young wolf crossed the world," she said. "Tell me, Robb Stark, do you come as a king or as a man seeking peace?" Robb met her gaze, feeling the weight of every life depending on his answer. "Perhaps both," he said, "if you'll allow it." And as her dragon circled above them, casting shadows like wings across the sand, something shifted between them, something unexpected, something dangerous, something that could reshape the world. The heat of Essos pressed down on Robb like a heavy cloak as he followed Daenerys across the beach toward the small camp her people had built. His soldiers trailed behind him with stiff shoulders and uneasy eyes, especially after the dragon's arrival. Greywind moved beside his master, tense but alert, watching every new scent, every shifting movement. The Dothraki who guarded the queen kept their hands on curved blades, their expressions unreadable, as if waiting for someone to make a wrong move. The air felt thick with mistrust, and yet there was something else beneath it, a quiet curiosity neither side wanted to acknowledge. Daenerys walked ahead with a calm that impressed him. No fear, no hesitation. She carried herself like a queen accustomed to commanding armies, and yet there was a gentleness in the way she glanced back at him, as if measuring not only her strength, but the burden she carried. When they reached a shaded tent overlooking the sea, she motioned for him to join her inside. He could feel 100 eyes watching them, wondering what decision these two strangers might make for the world. Inside the tent, the air was cooler. Robb noticed maps spray across a table, marks of battles won and battles yet to come. Daenerys didn't sit. She stood with her hands on the table, her gaze drifting over Westeros, as though she was studying an old wound. He saw longing in her eyes, but also pain. Pain sharp and familiar, the kind that never fully heals. "You fought for your crown," she said, quietly, without looking at him. "And I fight for mine. Yet our enemies grow stronger because we fight alone." Robb stepped closer, studying the same map. His home stretched before him, Winterfell, the Wolfswood, the rivers and hills that shaped his childhood. Seeing it drawn from across the world reminded him of how far he had come, how fragile everything had become. "The North bleeds," he admitted. "Every house pays a price for this war. Every family carries grief. The Lannisters offer no mercy. They will not stop until my house falls." Daenerys finally turned to him. "My brother always spoke of Westeros as if it were his by blood alone, but I have learned that a throne means nothing if your people do not believe in you." Her eyes softened, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding born from loss, not power. "Perhaps our enemies expect us to remain divided," she continued. "Perhaps the only way either of us survives is if we choose something different." Robb knew her words carried more weight than a simple alliance. Marriage, unity not just in arms, but in legacy. A bond that would echo across the kingdoms and force every lord, every army to reconsider their loyalties. It was a risk so enormous that even thinking of it felt dangerous. Yet he had come this far, crossing seas and doubts alight. He owed the North a chance at peace. "What is it you hope to gain from this union?" I asked, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. Daenerys stepped closer, her expression open, but "A future where my children inherit a world better than the one that destroyed my family," she said. "A world where fire does not burn everything it touches, and ice does not swallow what remains. A world shaped not by fear, but by the strength of those who survived it." Robb held her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. Children, legacy. She spoke not as a conqueror, but as someone desperate to rebuild something broken. He thought of his own father, of promises left unfulfilled, of a North torn between loyalty and despair. He wanted to offer his people more than war. Maybe this was the only way to do that. Outside, the soft rumble of a dragon rolled across the camp, making the ground tremble. Greywind growled in response, though he did not retreat. Daenerys noticed, a small smile touching her lips. "He protects you fiercely," she said. "As your dragons protect you," Robb replied. "They are my children," she said quietly. "The only children I have known." For the first time, he heard loneliness in her voice, a deep, aching loneliness he recognized all too well. Losing a father, losing a home, losing the world you thought you belonged to. Those wounds carved similar shapes in different hearts. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It simply hung there, waiting. At last, Daenerys spoke again. "If we do this, Robb Stark, it will change everything. The North would no longer stand alone. My claim would no longer threaten your people. But our enemies will strike harder than ever before. They will fear what we become together." Robb nodded. They should. She studied him for a long moment, as if searching for the truth beneath his words. Whatever she saw seemed to reassure her, because her shoulders relaxed and her voice softened. "Then tell me truthfully, do you believe we can trust each other?" "I believe," he said slowly, "that we have both lost too much to betray what remains." For the first time since their meeting, Daenerys allowed herself to look uncertain. Not weak, never that, but human. A queen shaped by fire, facing a king shaped by winter. Two people who had learned that trust was a rare gift in a world built on lies. She offered her hand, a simple gesture, but one that felt like fate unfolding between them. Robb took it. A spark of warmth passed between their palms. Not magic, not prophecy, just something real, fragile, and new. Something that might save them or damn them both. The days that followed were filled with a tension that neither Robb nor Daenerys could ignore. Their agreement had not yet been announced, but word travels faster than wind in a camp full of uneasy soldiers. The Dothraki watched the northern men with open suspicion, and Robb's bannermen muttered among themselves, unsure whether their young king had stepped toward salvation or straight into a dragon's jaws. Greywind roamed restlessly, sniffing strangers, growling at shadows, always placing himself between Robb and anything unfamiliar. The dragons circled the skies above, sending bursts of heat that made the northerners flinch each time their wings cut through the air. Two worlds had collided, and neither understood the other. But Robb found himself returning to Daenerys' tent as naturally as a wolf returns to familiar ground. Each meeting chipped away at the doubts that had once chained him. She was fierce, yes, but there was a softness beneath her fire. A softness she allowed only when they spoke alone. She asked questions no queen had ever asked him. About the cold mornings in Winterfell, about the godswood he used to hide in as a boy, about his fears, his mistakes, the weight he carried from the moment his father died. And in return, she shared her own truths, how she survived under Viserys' cruelty, how she found strength among strangers, how she carried a kingdom she had never seen inside her heart as if it were a living child. Yet trust did not grow easily. One afternoon, as they studied the same map once again, Daenerys spoke words that tested the fragile bridge between them. "If we marry," she said quietly, "I must still claim the Iron Throne. I cannot abandon that, Robb. It is not just a crown. It is justice for my house." Robb stiffened. He had expected the topic eventually, but hearing it aloud struck something raw inside him. "And the North?" he asked. "Will it bend the knee again after everything we've suffered? After all the blood we spilled to stand on our own?" Daenerys looked at him with eyes that held both steel and sorrow. "I do not ask the North to kneel, but I cannot divide the realm. I am meant to unite." The words hung between them like a blade. He wanted to believe they could find a path where both their dreams survived, but the more they spoke, the clearer it became that unity required sacrifice. He wondered if he had traveled across the world not for peace, but for another chain around his people's necks. Seeing the conflict in his expression, Daenerys stepped closer, her voice low. I do not want to rule the North. I want to rule with you. But if we stand together, our kingdoms must also stand together. What good is a marriage if our realms remain enemies? Robb looked away, wrestling with the truth he did not want to face. The North remembers, he said. We remember what Southern kings did to us, to my father, to my family. And my family? She asked softly. What do you think was done to them? Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with old wounds reopening. In that moment, Robb realized something bitter and simple. Suffering had marked them both, but suffering had also divided the world around them. Every scar came with a story of betrayal. Every kingdom carried its own ghosts. If they let those ghosts guide them, then their marriage would crumble before it began. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers against her hand. I don't want the North to be ruled, he said quietly, but I don't want endless war either. I want a world where our children don't have to choose between fire or ice. Daenerys's lips parted slightly, as if the idea touched something deep inside her. Then perhaps there is another way, she murmured. But whatever she might have said next was interrupted by a thunderous roar that shook the ground. One of the dragons descended with a fury that made the tent walls ripple. Outside, shouts erupted. Northern soldiers scrambling for weapons, Dothraki preparing to defend her queen, chaos threatening to swallow everything. The dragons circled the skies above, sending bursts of heat that made the Northerners flinch each time their wings cut through the air. Two worlds had collided, and neither understood the other. But Robb found himself returning to Daenerys' tent as naturally as a wolf returns to familiar ground. Each meeting chipped away at the doubts that had once chained him. She was fierce, yes, but there was a softness beneath her fire, a softness she allowed only when they spoke alone. She asked questions no queen had ever asked him, about the cold mornings in Winterfell, about the godswood he used to hide in as a boy, about his fears, his mistakes, the weight he carried from the moment his father died. And in return, she shared her own truths, how she survived under Viserys' cruelty, how she found strength among strangers, how she carried a kingdom she had never seen inside her heart as if it were a living child. Yet trust did not grow easily. One afternoon, as they studied the same map once again, Daenerys spoke words that tested the fragile bridge between them. If we marry, she said quietly, I must still claim the Iron Throne. I cannot abandon that, Robb. It is not just a crown. It is justice for my house. Robb stiffened. He had expected the topic eventually, but hearing it aloud struck something raw inside him. And the North? He asked. Will it bend the knee again after everything we've suffered? After all the blood we spilled to stand on our own? Daenerys looked at him with eyes that held both steel and sorrow. I do not ask the North to kneel, but I cannot divide the realm. I am meant to unite. The words hung between them like a blade. He wanted to believe they could find a path where both their dreams survived, but the more they spoke, the clearer it became that unity required sacrifice. He wondered if he had traveled across the world not for peace, but for another chain around his people's necks. Seeing the conflict in his expression, Daenerys stepped closer, her voice low. I do not want to rule the North. I want to rule with you. But if we stand together, our kingdoms must also stand together. What good is a marriage if our realms remain enemies? Robb looked away, wrestling with the truth he did not want to face. The North remembers, he said. We remember what Southern kings did to us, to my father, to my family. And my family? She asked softly. What do you think was done to them? Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with old wounds reopening. In that moment, Robb realized something bitter and simple. Suffering had marked them both, but suffering had also divided the world around them. Every scar came with a story of betrayal. Every kingdom carried its own ghosts. If they let those ghosts guide them, then their marriage would crumble before it began. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers against her hand. I don't want the North to be ruled, he said quietly, But I don't want endless war either. I want a world where our children, their union would never be forged through gentle talks or quiet agreements. It would be forged in battle, in blood, in choices that would change them both. And as the first enemy ships crested the horizon, he realized that his life had shifted again, irreversibly, toward a future shaped by a dragon queen who refused to kneel and a wolf king who refused to break. The sea wind grew colder as the enemy ships crept closer, dark shapes slicing through the waves like blades drawn for murder. Robb felt the tension rise through the northern lines, men gripping their weapons with stiff hands while their eyes flicked nervously toward the dragon crouched behind them. Many of his soldiers had never seen a ship larger than a fishing boat, let alone a fleet carrying Lannister steel. They stood on foreign sand with foreign sun on their backs, and yet war had a way of making any land feel familiar. Fear, anger, and the taste of coming violence always felt the same. Daenerys moved among her people with calm authority, speaking in Dothraki, then in the tongue of the freedmen. Her voice was steady, a voice that steadied others simply by being heard. Robb watched her from a distance, surprised by the quiet certainty she brought to chaos. Even his most seasoned captains carried doubt in battle, but Daenerys walked as if the world bent around her choices, not the other way around. Still, he could sense her fear, a thin, hidden thread running beneath her words. This was not the battlefield she expected. The Lannisters catching her unprepared meant they were daring her, testing her legend. And somewhere deep in her heart, the fear of losing what she had built tugged at her like an old scar. When she finally approached him, Drogon stalking behind her like a living shadow, Robb braced himself. He knew what she would say before she spoke. "They come for me," she said quietly, though her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "They want to cut me down before I ever reach Westeros." Robb shook his head. "They come for both of us. Tywin Lannister would never allow a Stark king to unite with a Targaryen queen. It threatens everything he's built." Daenerys glanced at him, her silver hair whipping around her face as the wind picked up. "Your bannermen doubt this alliance," she said. "I can feel it in their stares." "And yours doubt me," Robb replied. "That's the nature of fear. It makes men look at allies as enemies." For a moment, neither spoke. The roaring of the waves drowned out every other sound except the deep, slow breath of Drogon beside them. Robb felt the dragon's heat against his skin, as if fire itself stood waiting for his next decision. "We need a plan," Daenerys said at last. "We cannot face them on the water." "We won't," Robb answered. "We hold them on the beach. The North has fought worse on harsher ground, and with your dragons—" She winced slightly, a detail most would miss. Robb frowned. "What is it?" "My dragons are growing," she said slowly. "They are strong, but they are not ready for full war. Drogon fights with fury, not control. The other two still fear the sea." Robb had never considered dragons could be uncertain about anything. It made them feel strangely real, fallible, like young soldiers thrown into battle too early. "Then we fight without relying on them," Robb said. "We use them only when we must. Your people and mine stand side by side on the sand." Daenerys studied him again, searching her face. He didn't know what she hoped to find, strength, perhaps, or a reason to believe this alliance was more than desperation. Whatever it was, she seemed to find it, because her shoulders eased, and she let out a slow breath. "Then we stand together," she said. He nodded. It took only minutes for orders to spread. Northern shields formed a wide half-circle across the beach, heavy wood braced into the sand. The Dothraki formed a second line behind them, their horses restless, their riders gripping arax with wild anticipation. Missandei moved through the ranks translating commands, while Grey Worm prepared the Unsullied with quiet discipline. The camp buzzed with tension, yet an unlikely unity hummed beneath it. Wolves, dragons, horsemen, and freed slaves, gathering for a battle none of them had planned, but all would fight. As Robb walked the northern line, men reached for him, not physically, but with their eyes. Some sought courage, some sought reassurance. Some simply wanted to know that their king would not abandon them, even here, on foreign sands far from home. He stopped where the youngest soldiers stood, boys barely grown, shaking as they gripped shields almost too heavy for their arms. He spoke gently, just as his father once had. "You fight today not for crowns," he told them, "but for each other. Hold the man beside you, and he will hold you." Their breathing steadied. When he reached the center of the line, Daenerys stepped up beside him. She didn't make a speech. She simply looked at him and nodded. Something about that simple gesture made the moment feel heavier than any sword he'd ever lifted. The first Lannister ship scraped onto the shallows, then another and another. The air thickened with dread as armored men began to jump into the water, splashing toward shore with shields raised and spears lifted. Their red lions gleamed in the sun like fresh blood. Robb drew his sword, raising it just high enough for both armies to see. "Hold," he called out, voice echoing across the battlefield. Daenerys lifted her chin, her eyes shining with determination and fear all tangled together. She stood close enough for their shoulders to nearly touch, as if fate had placed them side by side on purpose. The sea wind whipped harder. Drogon growled, wings flexing. The Lannisters charged, and the world exploded into war. The clash came like a storm, loud, bloody, and impossible to ignore. Lannister men surged onto the sand, armor clanking, banners snapping. They met the northern line with a crash of wood and steel, shields splintering, spears snapping like brittle reeds. Men shouted names and prayers, some in the old tongue of the north, others in the common speech of the south. Sand flew up like smoke. Blood painted bright marks on the pale shore. For a moment, time narrowed to the beat of heart and the clash of blades. Robb moved through the fighting with a single purpose: to hold the line. His sword found the pockets of space between enemies, each swing a measured answer to a threat. Around him, his bannermen fought with the stubbornness of men who had lost everything and therefore had nothing left to fear. The Greatjon roared like thunder, his axe a blur as men fell to either side. Tallhart and Mormont kept the center firm. Their faces were lands carved by grief and hardened into resolve. Yet even as the North fought like wolves at the edge of the world, the Lannister soldiers pressed with numbers and ruthless training. Behind that first line, the Dothraki spilled into the fray like wild wind. They rode low and fast, their curved blades flashing, striking where steel and shield could not. Their method was chaos, and chaos cut deep into Lannister formations that expected rigid order. Men who thought they could hold a straight line were confused, then bloodied, then broken. Watching Dothraki horses wheel and riders shout was like watching a storm change shape into something alive. Drogon loomed above, a terrifying shadow that turned the sky itself into a weapon. He screamed, a sound like the end of the world, and dove, a living firestorm, forcing men to scatter or be burned alive. A column of Lannister pikemen tried to form beneath him, but the heat alone made their armor glow and their faces peel with sweat. Robb felt the heat down to his bones. It was as if summer had come to Winterfell, cruel and sudden. Gray wind darted through the chaos, biting ankles, tearing at cloaks, doing what direwolves do best, finding weakness and ripping it open. Yet the fighting was not all brutal strength. There were moments that cut like small knives, friends lost in seconds, a young boy collapsing beside his shield with his last breath, a banner lowered as its lord fell. Robb caught sight of a man he'd grown up with from Winterfell, a cousin whose laugh had once echoed in the halls. The man went down under a Lannister spear, eyes wide with surprise. Robb reached him too late to save him. He felt the old, familiar hollow of loss open again and swallowed it down. There was no time to grieve. There was only the next moment, and the next, and the next. Missandei and Grey Worm moved with disciplined grace, guiding units where they were needed. The Unsullied were walls unto themselves, columns of spears that met the enemy with cold, steady will. Their presence bought space for the Dothraki to tear apart formations, and for Robb's men to regroup when they were pushed back. The Northmen found unexpected comfort in lines that did not break. Tywin's men were cunning. Their commanders had learned sea warfare and had adjusted quickly. Skeleton crews moved like shadows, setting traps, feigning retreats to draw the North into deadly pockets. Robb realized with grim clarity that this was not just a battlefield, but a chessboard where Lannister hands had thought many moves ahead. It forced him to stop reacting and begin to plan mid-fight. He shouted orders, repositioning shield walls, redirecting the Dothraki to flank a column, pulling the youngest fighters back behind veteran spearmen. His voice cut through the noise, and men followed because of who he was, and because he had been theirs through grief and victory. At one point, a squad of Lannister cavalry broke through a gap and rode straight toward the command tent where Daenerys stood with her advisors. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Robb saw the riders, felt the hot blood race through his veins, and ran, not away from danger, but through it. He met them head-on, blade flashing, shield raised. The impact was brutal. Horse and man collided, men screamed, and the rider fell. Robb's sword met another blade, sparks like tiny stars against the sand. He ducked, rolled, and came up with fury that surprised even him. He felt Daenerys' eyes on him through the chaos, and in that moment, something quieter than war passed between them, a fierce recognition that they would not let the other fall. Drogon circled again, drawing more fire away from the ground where men fought. The smaller dragons, Rhaegal and Viserion, were less willing, begging to follow or balking at the water-scented wind. Yet, it was enough. The combination of disciplined lines, unpredictable horsemen, and the terrifying presence of dragonfire slowed the Lannister push. Men on the ships watched the battlefield like gamblers watching a turning card. Many turned and fled, unwilling to commit further. Still, victory did not come without cost. When the tide of battle finally began to turn and the Lannister lines started to crumble, Robb stumbled upon a scene that made his chest clench. Cousins, captains, and boys he'd taught to swing a sword, lying broken and still. He dropped to his knees beside one, pressing a bloody palm to a wound that would not stop. The man's eyes opened for a moment, then closed, exhaling the life that Robb had not been able to hold. He wanted to scream at the gods, to tear the sea apart, to shout that this cannot be the price of hope. Instead, he rose, wiping hands on his fur, and moved on. There was work to be done, bodies to collect, wounds to mend, letters to send, promises to keep alive. When the sun sank low and the last of the Lannister banners were driven back into the surf or the flames, Robb found Daenerys standing on the same rise where they had first met on this strange shore. She looked as if the battle had aged her by years. Her hair was tangled, her eyes ringed with ash. But when she saw him, there was a smile, a small, tired thing that held both relief and sorrow. "We held," she said, simply. "We did," he answered. They stood together in silence for a long while, watching the dying embers and the fight that had cost more than either could count. Around them, men began to sing quietly, old northern songs mixed with Dothraki chants, a ragged chorus that sounded like mourning and triumph rolled into one. Robb thought of the cost and felt the weight of the choice he had made settle into him like a stone. He had crossed seas for this. He had married a promise to a future that now smells of salt and blood. The world had shifted, alliances had been tested, and, for now, had held. But as he looked at Daenerys, he knew this was only the beginning. Tywin would not end his plots on a single beach. The war for the Seven Kingdoms was far from over. Still, in that moment, amid ruin and victory, something burned steady between them. Not a spark to be fanned into a legend, but a steady flame warm enough to fight back the cold and possibly, someday, to light a new road. Night settled slowly over the battered shore, bringing a quiet that felt almost unnatural after the violence of the day. The wounded had been taken to makeshift tents. Fires burned along the beach, but the flames seemed tired, as if even they felt the weight of the dead. Robb walked among his men with steps that grew heavier each time he passed another familiar face bandaged or still. He offered words where he could, comfort where he must, and silent nods where grief allowed nothing more. Gray Wind followed closely, sniffing at wounds, growling softly at shadows, unable to rest when Robb could not. When Robb finally stepped away from the camp, seeking a moment alone, he found Daenerys already standing at the edge of the water. She wore a simple cloak now, not her queenly armor, just a woman staring at the dark horizon. Drogon slept a short distance behind her, curled into an enormous black mound, his tail twitching every few breaths. The smaller dragons, Rhaegal and Viserion, were less willing, begging to follow or balking at the water-scented wind. Yet, it was enough. The combination of disciplined lines, unpredictable horsemen, and the terrifying presence of dragonfire slowed the Lannister push. Men on the ships watched the battlefield like gamblers watching a turning card. Many turned and fled, unwilling to commit further. Still, victory did not come without cost. When the tide of battle finally began to turn and the Lannister line started to crumble, Robb stumbled upon a scene that made his chest clench. Cousins, captains, and boys he'd taught to swing a sword, lying broken and still. He dropped to his knees beside one, pressing a bloody palm to a wound that would not stop. The man's eyes opened for a moment, then closed, exhaling the life that Robb had not been able to hold. He wanted to scream at the gods, to tear the sea apart, to shout that this cannot be the price of hope. Instead, he rose, wiping hands on his fur, and moved on. There was work to be done, bodies to collect, wounds to mend, letters to send, promises to keep alive. When the sun sank low and the last of the Lannister banners were driven back into the surf or the flames, Robb found Daenerys standing on the same rise where they had first met on this strange shore. She looked as if the battle had aged her by years. Her hair was tangled, her eyes ringed with ash. But when she saw him, there was a smile. A small, tired thing that held both relief and sorrow. "We held," she said, simply. "We did," he answered. They stood together in silence for a long while, watching the dying embers of a fight that had cost more than either could count. Around them, men began to sing quietly, old northern songs mixed with Dothraki chants, a ragged chorus that sounded like mourning and triumph rolled into one. Robb thought of the cost and felt the weight of the choice he had made settle into him like a stone. He had crossed seas for this. He had married a promise to a future that now smells of salt and blood. The world had shifted, alliances had been tested, and, for now, had held. But as he looked at Daenerys, he knew this was only the beginning. Tywin would not end his plots on a single beach. The war for the Seven Kingdoms was far from over. Still, in that moment, amid ruin and victory, something burned steady between them. Not a spark to be fanned into a legend, but a steady flame warm enough to fight back the cold and possibly, someday, to light a new road. Night settled slowly over the battered shore, bringing a quiet that felt almost unnatural after the violence of the day. The wounded had been taken to makeshift tents. Fires burned along the beach, but the flames seemed tired, as if even they felt the weight of the dead. Robb walked among his men with steps that grew heavier each time he passed another familiar face bandaged or still. He offered words where he could, comfort where he must, and silent nods where grief allowed nothing more. Gray Wind followed closely, sniffing at wounds, growling softly at shadows, unable to rest when Robb could not. When Robb finally stepped away from the camp, seeking a moment alone, he found Daenerys already standing at the edge of the water. She wore a simple cloak now, not her queenly armor, just a woman staring at the dark horizon. Drogon slept a short distance behind her, curled into an enormous black mound, his tail twitching every few breaths. The smaller dragons, Rhaegal and Viserion, were less willing, begging to follow or balking at the water-scented wind. Yet, it was enough. The combination of disciplined lines, unpredictable horsemen, and the terrifying presence of dragonfire slowed the Lannister push. Men on the ships watched the battlefield like gamblers watching a turning card. Many turned and fled, unwilling to commit further. Still, victory did not come without cost. When the tide of battle finally began to turn and the Lannister line started to crumble, Robb stumbled upon a scene that made his met her eyes. And for a moment, he saw not a queen or a claimant to a distant throne, but a woman burdened by loneliness, by expectations, by a destiny others had forced upon her. She had lost her childhood, her family, her home. He had lost much of the same. Their griefs did not match, but they understood each other's wounds in a way no one else could. Still, doubt crept up like an unwelcome shadow. "Your people still don't trust mine," Robb said, "and mine don't trust yours." "They don't have to," Daenerys whispered. "Not yet." The wind shifted, brushing hair across her face. Robb reached out without thinking and gently moved the strand aside. Daenerys didn't pull away. She watched him with quiet intensity, her breath catching in her throat. Something unspoken moved between them, something fragile, like a flame waiting to be either fed or extinguished. Daenerys stepped closer. "Why did you really come to me, Robb?" she asked. "Beyond alliances, beyond war, why did you come?" He hesitated. He had asked himself the same question on restless nights aboard the ships. At first, he had come for the North, for safety, for strategy. But somewhere along the way, somewhere between reading her letter and standing before her on the beach, his reasons had shifted. "I came," he said slowly, "because I wanted something different than what the war was turning me into. Because every day I fought alone, I felt myself fading, losing pieces of who I am. And when I heard of you, it felt like a chance, maybe the only chance, to become someone better instead of someone hardened." Daenerys absorbed his words with a stillness that held more meaning than reaction. She stepped even closer, so close he could feel the warmth of her breath. "You think I wanted this war?" she whispered. "I wanted a home. I wanted a family. I wanted to feel safe somewhere. But every time I reached for it, the world took it away." "And now?" he asked. She looked down at the water, her voice barely audible. "Now I reach for something else, something I've never had." Then she lifted her gaze and met his with striking certainty. "Someone who stands with me, not behind me, not beneath me, with me." Her confession lingered in the air, warm and dangerous. Robb felt something shift inside him, something calm and certain. He lifted a hand and brushed his thumb against her cheek, gently wiping away a line of ash she hadn't noticed. Her eyes fluttered closed for a heartbeat. When she opened them again, she didn't look afraid. "Daenerys," he said, voice low, "when this war is over, whatever world we build, you won't face it alone." She leaned into his touch ever so slightly, letting herself rest against the promise in his words. "No," she said softly, "neither will you." Behind them, the waves kept rolling, steady and patient, as if they waited for the moment when fire and ice would finally decide the shape of the world they wanted to build together. The weeks that followed the battle felt like a slow tide, sometimes steady, sometimes pulling away so fast it revealed the mud beneath. They could not stay on a foreign shore forever. Victory there meant nothing unless it was turned into safety at home. So they sailed north with a strange convoy. Northern longships, Dothraki riders cramped on decks, the Unsullied packed like spear points, and 3 dragons wheeling above as if to warn the world of their passage. The sight alone made many lords think twice before raising a banner against them. But sight and fear are not the same as loyalty. The journey home was quieter than the ride out. Men slept when they could, mouths tight around memories of those they'd lost. Robb rode the decks most nights, staring at the black water until his eyes burned. Daenerys sat with him under a sky that resembled a different kind of winter, stars like ice pins. They spoke little at first. Words felt small against the swell of everything that had happened. But their silences soon threaded into a companionable closeness. Sometimes she told him stories of exile, small things, a market in Karth, a child who'd given her fruit, and he told her about Winterfell's kitchens and the old weirwood whose face watched generations pass. They found in each other the odd comforts of someone who knew that grief could be companion and teacher. When they reached the north, the reception was stiff and strange. Winterfell's gates opened, but not with the warmth Robb had imagined. Catelyn stood on the battlements like a woman who'd been waiting in a long hallway for a door to open and wondered whether she should step inside. She held her hand to her mouth when she first saw Daenerys, an instinctive shield of horror, then guarded curiosity. Robb felt his heart twist. He had expected his mother's doubts, but he had hoped they'd melt with time. Instead, her eyes held caution like sharpened knives. The marriage was not a quiet thing. It could not be. It had to be public, so the northern lords could see the union and judge its truth. So they married beneath Winterfell's great weirwood, the old face watching like an ancient witness. The godswood smelled of sap and frost. Robb's vows were plain and true, yours and mine for as long as both reign. Daenerys's were fiercer, promising protection and memory to the fallen, a pledge of future children who would inherit a world not split by hate. Catelyn's face did not soften. Instead, she folded her hands as if holding herself together. Some lords left the godswood without a word. Some stayed, eyes narrowed like Jorn bows. But the marriage bound them, legally and symbolically, and that mattered. At the feast that followed, the halls were a strange mix of customs. Dothraki drums rumbled under the northern songs. Unsullied kept exact distances while northerners drank ale by the flagon. Daenerys tried sitting at the high table in a way that matched Stark customs, and Robb made sure she understood the small courtesies of the north, the way men stood, the way an elder's word was given weight. Catelyn sat across from them, eating slowly. She watched Daenerys the way one watches a falcon on a ledge, for signs of uncontrolled hunger. Sometimes their eyes met. Daenerys would offer a small, patient smile, as if promise alone might move mountains. Politics moved quietly, like wolves circling a fresh kill. With their union public, Robb and Daenerys launched diplomatic sends at once. Letters flew to the Riverlands, the Vale, and even the Stormlands. Some answered with courtesy, some returned empty. The Freys were polite and cool, their smiles not reaching their eyes. Roose Bolton sent a cold, efficient message promising troops. He always did. But there was a stiffness to the tone that made Robb's skin prickle. It was the sort of formal loyalty that could be turned with the right coin or the right threat. Robb had learned to read those letters like little traps. Catelyn met with her son in private more than once, and those talks were sharp and honest. She asked about the terms, land, law, and the North's old freedoms. She worried that her son had married a ruler who might not understand the North's hard geometry of honor and snow. Robb listened, patient and full of reasons. He told her what he had told Daenerys, that he had not gone seeking a crown for himself, but a way to stop blood from flowing. He promised to preserve the North's independence of custom, and Daenerys, for her part, swore to respect the old laws and the gods of the Starks. Catelyn's face softened a touch. It was a start. Yet not all were moved by promises. Old grudges are stubborn. In the south, the Lannisters gathered their allies. Tywin, smart and patient as a winter fox, wrote quietly and with venom. Marriage offers, threats, rewards. He could see the danger of a Stark-Targaryen union. It made his enemies into something else, something that might threaten his house's reach. He sent emissaries with smiles and contracts, sowing doubt into places men already felt fear. A cup of gold, a title, a quiet assurance that if a man put his hoop in the Lannister's hand, he might live comfortably. Power invites bargains. Inside Winterfell, whispers spread like a hearth fire across dry kindling. Some lords muttered about ancient bloodlines, about the Targaryen dragons who'd once broken the realm. Others feared the Dothraki's unpredictability or the dragon's hunger for land and flesh. Daenerys answered by walking among them, learning to carry herself as a northerner learned to carry winter, steadily, without show. She knelt with a small, sick child in a damp hall and spoke to him in the common tongue, and when old men saw children's quiet smiles in response, some softened, but the world of men changes slowly. It was in this slow heat that the first real threat appeared, not on the battlefield, but in a messenger's hand. The raven came battered, feathers torn, the wax smeared. The seal was broken, but the message was clear enough. A host had been sighted near the twins, banners of the Riverlands massing, and rumors, thin as smoke, but still smoke, said the phrase had welcomed secret guests. The messenger trembled as he spoke, and when Robb read the words, a cold, unlike winter ran through him. He and Daenerys met in the war room, maps spread out, advisors muttering. The twins lay at the throat of the Riverlands. If the phrase chose a side, if they betrayed the crossing, bridges would close and armies could be trapped. Robb's jaw clenched. A betrayal there could cut his lines and trap his people far from home. He saw the shadow of past missteps and felt the old familiar dread. But this time, he had the Dragon Queen by his side. Daenerys watched the map, her finger tracing routes like a hand learning the shape of new lands. "We cannot let them choose for us," she said. Her voice held steel. "If the Freys sell their bridge, they will have bought a price too dear." Robb drew in a slow breath. The choice lay in his hands. Send emissaries with gold, threaten, or march to the twins and force their hand. Each option held dangers. Each choice would shape the next winter of their lives. The room pulsed with plans and worry. Outside, the snow started that day, soft, early, and stubborn. It fell as if to mark time, covering fresh tracks and old mistakes alike. Robb felt the weight of that snow like a ledger. He understood then, as he had before, that marriage had not ended the war. It had only changed its terms. And when two great houses are bound, old treacheries find new ways to creep in. He looked at Daenerys. Her jaw was set, her eyes burned with a determination that made his heart both proud and heavy. "We decide," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, "together." They had each other now, but enemies were many, and the road ahead thin and treacherous. A single choice would test the promise they had made beneath the weirwood. The raven's news hung between them like an omen, and the winter outside seemed to lean in. The snow outside Winterfell thickened overnight, settling in heavy sheets that muffled sound and hid footsteps. By morning, the world felt smaller, quieter, as if winter itself were listening. Robb stood at the window of their chamber before dawn, the soft glow of fire behind him and the hard glow of snow before him. He had not slept. Neither had Daenerys. She rose from the bed, pulling her cloak around her shoulders as she joined him by the window. For a moment, neither spoke. Words were fragile in moments like this, and they both feared breaking something precious. "We leave today," she said eventually, though she already knew the answer. "Yes," Robb replied, exhaling slowly. "If the Freys are plotting, we must confront it before it grows." Daenerys watched his reflection in the frosted window. "And if they choose treachery?" "Then we deal with it together," he said, "whatever that means." The morning council met quickly. Catelyn was the first to object, her face carved with worry. "Walder Frey is not a man to trust, Robb," she said. "He bends whichever way the wind blows gold. Marching there with Daenerys beside you may back him into a corner." Daenerys only listened, her expression unreadable. Catelyn's fear was real, rooted in the same wounds that shaped every northerner now. But Daenerys had grown used to being mistrusted. She expected suspicion before respect. "We will not provoke him," Daenerys replied calmly. "We will arrive with a measured force, enough to protect ourselves, not enough to threaten." "And if that is seen as weakness?" Greatjon asked. "Then they have made their choice," Robb said simply. The decision was final. They rode out by midday, a smaller contingent than their armies, but still formidable. 200 northern men, 100 unsullied, a small band of Dothraki who refused to let their queen ride without them, and Drogon circling high above the clouds. Rhaegal and Viserion remained at Winterfell, too young for a long march through snow, but Drogon, restless and protective, refused to stay behind. The road to the twins wound through forests silvered by frost. The silence of the trees felt unnatural. Birds fled before the dragon's shadow, and the ground cracked under horses' hooves. Daenerys rode beside Robb, her breath forming pale clouds. She looked strangely at home in the cold, her silver hair dusted with snowflakes like a crown of winter roses. Robb glanced at her often, unable to help himself. Her presence steadied him, even now, with uncertainty circling like wolves in the dark. She caught him looking once, offered a faint smile, and nudged her horse closer until their shoulders nearly brushed. "I've never seen snow," she confessed quietly. He blinked, surprised. "Never?" "No. In Essos, winter is a story, not a season. To feel it?" She lifted a hand, letting flakes fall onto her palm. "It's gentle, but it hides everything. Beautiful and dangerous." "Like dragons," Robb said, smiling faintly. She tilted her head, considering him. "Like wolves," she corrected. The twins appeared on the horizon by dusk. Two massive towers rose on either side of the river, joined by the famous bridge, Walder Frey's pride, his power, his weapon. No fires burned atop the battlements. No banners flapped. Everything looked still. Too still. Robb felt his stomach knot. When they reached the gate, Frey guards waited in stiff silence. Their eyes flicked toward Drogon's shadow overhead, and their hands trembled around their spears. After a moment of unease, the gates creaked open. "Lord Walder welcomes King Robb Stark and Queen Daenerys Targaryen," he requests. Requests. Not invites, not honors. Requests. Robb felt his grip tighten on his reins. Inside, the halls were warm, but not welcoming. Walder Frey waited in his high-backed chair like a dusty corpse refusing burial. His milky eyes fixed first on Robb, then on Daenerys. Only a faint twitch in his jaw betrayed surprise. At seeing the Dragon Queen alive, at seeing them arrive together, at the certainty of what their union meant. "So," Walder croaked, his voice thin as parchment, "the wolf brings a dragon to my doorstep?" Daenerys stepped forward before Robb could speak. "We come seeking truth, Lord Frey, not conflict." Walder's laugh wheezed through the hall. "Truth? There is no truth in war, girl. Only survival." Robb felt rage prick at him, but Daenerys raised a small hand, signaling calm. "We hear you've welcomed guests," Robb said evenly, "from the south." Walder's eyes gleamed with an ugly spark. "I welcome whoever pays respect and gold." Daenerys's tone cooled. "Are you threatening your king?" Walder scoffed. "I don't recall bending the knee to any king of snow or fire." Robb stepped closer, voice low enough to vibrate through the hall. "Then choose your words, Lord Frey. The North stands behind me. The dragons stand behind Daenerys. Choose wrong, and you may find your bridge burned on both ends." Walder's expression faltered for the first time. Before he could respond, a distant tremor shook the hall. A roar. Not Drogon's, but the roar of collapsing wood. Robb's heart lurched. Men scrambled to windows. Outside, torches flared, dozens, then hundreds, shields glinting beneath them. An army. Lannister colors mixed with Frey banners. Walder's grin spread slowly, rotten and triumphant. "You came here seeking truth," he said, gloating. "Well, here it is." Robb's hand went to his sword. Daenerys inhaled sharply, the air around her seeming to warm, her eyes darkening like embers on the verge of ignition. Drogon screamed above the fortress, his shadow swallowing the courtyard. Winterfell was far away. Allies were thin. Treachery surrounded them on all sides. But Daenerys turned to Robb, her voice steady and fierce. "We fight our way out," she said, "together." Robb nodded, "Together." And as the Freys and Lannisters closed in, as Drogon descended like vengeance given wings, the wolf and the dragon stepped forward, not as strangers, not as bargaining pieces, but as a single, united force that the Seven Kingdoms would someday remember with awe or fear. The night exploded into war once more. But this time, they would write their own fate.